Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. I'm really pleased to be here with Bill Gette, who I've worked with before in the past, and I was so happy to bring him here to Ashland. But before we get started with Bill and his conversation about winter raptors, I wanted to do a couple things to say thanks to the Ashland Friends of the Ashland Library who support all of our programming. I would also like to thank our partners in crime in this program, the Tewksbury Library and the Newton Free Library. Patrons from those libraries are super welcome here, as well as our Ashlanders who I know are going to really enjoy this conversation. Bill has a presentation. It's about 55 to 60 minutes. So I'm going to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A and feel free to chat with each other during the conversation. But I will hold off any questions and chat to be discussed until the end of the presentation. But I'm happy to hear from you in the chat in the meantime. So Bill Gette, so exciting, is the founding director of Mass Audubon's Joppa Flats Education Center in Newburyport. He has over 30 years of experience leading groups to exciting local, domestic, and international destinations. He's visited all 7 continents, led groups on over 50 international travel programs, and conducted hundreds of field trips locally and throughout the states. And what I think is amazing about Bill, and we're just talking about this, is that all of the images in his presentation are ones he took himself. So not only is he a great speaker and knowledgeable about ornithology and birds, but he's also an amazing photographer. Bill, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
All right, Mina, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Nice to know we have so many folks joining us today. As Mina suggested, well, for me, I give a lot of talks for libraries. And I think of libraries as being one of our most democratic, with small d, democratic institutions, because of course they serve everybody in the community. They're so very, very important. And so I'm the president of the Friends of the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, and I know how important friends groups are to various different organizations. So if you can support your friends groups, your library, hey, why not a year-end donation? That would be a good thing. So anyway. Okay, so let's get started with our winter raptors. This is obviously a focus on New England, and we'll get started. So the presentation outline is as follows. We're going to be talking about some definitions. So if I talk about eruptive species, what does that mean? We'll talk about winter challenges. I mean, this is the time of year we're entering into, and it's a tough time of year. Methods of hunting. Various different birds of prey have different methods of hunting. We'll talk about those. We'll talk about the physical adaptations that makes it possible for these birds to do what they do. And then we're going to go into some species account. Again, this is a focus on New England, and I have broken it down in 3 different groups. Those are year-round residents. Now, a year-round resident, for example, a red-tailed hawk is a year-round resident. So, but the hawk that you see, the red-tailed hawk that you say in July, may not be the same red-tailed hawk that you see in December, but they're here. There are red-tailed hawks here all year. Then we'll talk about some winter residents. These are birds that basically only see in the wintertime. And then we'll discuss eruptive species. We'll define that. So again, year-round residents, those are the birds that either breed or overwinter in our area. Again, it doesn't have to be the same population, but they're always red-tailed hawks, for example, in this area. Along the coast where I am, for example, there may not be very many of them, but they're always a peregrine falcon, whether it be middle of the year or during the winter. A winter resident are those that I would not expect to see at all and don't see until they only come down here, say in the late fall or winter, and then typically have moved back out of our area by the springtime. So if you wanted to see a snowy owl, for example, wintertime is the only time to see them. We never have them here during the summertime. An eruptive species, this is a species of bird, and it can be things like crossbills or evening grosbeaks, certain types of owls. These are species that are present in some winters and not in others. An example on the other side, if you wanted to see a northern gannet, for example, that's a seabird, I know that I could take you to the coast in November, and I'm with absolute certainty I could show you one. Well, because their migration patterns are so regular and seasonal. But in the case of these eruptive species, you don't know from one year to another whether there are going to be any. So I can make an absolute promise. I can find certain birds for certain people other times of year, and there are other ones like these eruptive species that I can't tell you. Okay. Now in the wintertime, there's a very steep learning curve, especially for the young birds. And that first winter is very, very difficult. And they have to perfect their hunting techniques. Most of these birds are fledged, say, maybe in August, sometimes in September. And by the wintertime, they have to learn a lot. And the conditions become very difficult during the wintertime. So a key thing for any animal that's outside 24/7, of course, they have to be able to hunt in difficult conditions, and they have to be sure they can maintain their core body heat, because if they get too cold, they don't function very well and die. So they either have to hunt in very difficult conditions. In our area here in New England, that you can go for 2 or 3 days with the snow and high winds and almost zero visibility, yet these birds of prey are still here. And so they either have to find food or they have to draw on their fat reserves. Okay, they build up fat at certain times of the year, and especially the wintertime, they do their very best to have some fat reserve to get them through the 2 or 3 or 4 days of really tough times. And raptors, these are hawks and owls, especially hawks, like red-tailed hawks. You might be driving down a major highway, interstate or something, and you'll notice hawks sitting up on trees. Notice that typically they're always sitting on the sunny side of the road, okay, but to absorb the solar radiation to help maintain their body heat. So they're not only there for hunting opportunities, but they're also to try to maintain their heat. Hey, I call this winter challenges, avoiding injury, but this, of course, this is true any time of year. If you're a hawk, the simple act of attacking a prey animal, whether it be a squirrel, a bird, a skunk, whatever, presents an element of risk. I mean, the bird that you're attacking doesn't want to get caught, okay? And so it can try to fight back, or if the predatory bird is chasing another bird, it can run into something. So every time there's an attack, there's an element of risk. And of course, winter conditions, when it's cold and things of this nature, that can make it even more difficult. Now, for example, if you're a pigeon, and let's say you miscalculate and you run into a limb and you don't break your wing, but you strain or something, injure it, you can at least get by for a few days walking along eating seeds on the ground or something like that. But a bird of prey, especially a pursuit hunter, a bird that chases other birds to catch it in the air, if you have a damaged wing, you face starvation. So injuries. And of course, during the wintertime, a lot of birds begin their courtship displays, and actually they're breeding during the wintertime. For example, great horned owls and things of that nature start breeding in January and February. So they need to maintain the vigor and so forth in order to be able to attract a mate and start the courtship display and breeding process. So this is an important time of year. In terms of when you think of birds of prey like this, I think of them in 2 different groups. They're pounce hunters. Pounce hunters are birds that either soar overhead on thermals or updrafts, and they're watching, or they sit in a tree and wait for something to pass underneath it. A bird that soars overhead, for example, would be something like a red-tailed hawk. And maybe a bird that just sits up in the tree and pounces on something could be, say, a barred owl. But so they're actually sitting there watching, and then they go either out of where they've been soaring or jump off the perch and pounce on what they're chasing. And then there are the other ones, the more active ones. These are the pursuit hunters. These are the ones that think of them as fighter jets chasing other fighter jets. I mean, they are fighting prey. They're chasing prey in midair. And these birds have to be exceptionally maneuverable and fast. In one case, the pounce hunter just sort of drops on something, and the pursuit hunters have to be amazing pilots, if you wish. Okay. Some of them adaptations that are really important. This is used to be called marsh hawk. It's called northern harrier. This is an immature, but this by binocular vision, like we as humans have. Notice their eyes are facing forward. If you have a robin, the eyes are on either side of the head. Where on these birds of prey, they're in the front. And that helps them, the binocular vision, makes it the ability for these birds to focus on prey and triangulate and to determine how far away is that prey animal. So, and obviously, knowing how far away an animal is absolutely crucial in hunting. Another important physical characteristic is notice these talons of this snowy owl. No, those talons, each one of them is about 3 inches long, and they have about 300 pounds of pressure that when they close that their talons. Three toes forward, one back. So these are the talons. Now, if there's any doubt in your mind that this bill of this bald eagle is for ripping flesh, well, it's amazing. For the only other animals that have as distinctly hooked bills of those are the parrots. Okay, and they are using their sharp bill to open up the skin of fruit and things of that nature. But this bill of these raptors is for slicing through the skin and ripping flesh away from the bones. So really distinctive. That's quite a beautiful head of that bald eagle. Okay, then one adaptation is these broad wings. This is a red-tailed hawk. And if you are one of the birds that uses updrafts or thermals to circle over a field, for example, it's really beneficial to have big, broad wings to catch the air as it lifts up and to keep you just soaring over one spot where you're hunting, looking for snakes or rabbits or birds and things of that nature. So think of them, the raptors, as using a flying perch. Okay, and here you see the primary feathers and the secondary feathers, very broad wings, and notice the fanned broad tail. Okay, this is a wing of a barred owl. Okay, relatively short. It's not very long compared to its width, because again, this bird doesn't have to fly fast. All it has to do is get off, sitting on a perch, sees a prey animal below or hears a prey animal before, and just sort of parachutes down on its prey. Okay, then you have other birds that have these narrow, rounded wings. Okay, this is where the red-tailed hawk typically hunts out in the open fields. This is a bird. This is Cooper's hawk, an immature Cooper's hawk, and they are pursuit hunters within the forests and along forest edges. So they have to be able to fly and maneuver quickly among the trees through a dense forest. And so that relatively long tail that you see here is used as a rudder to be able to make quick turns as it's going in among the forest, chasing some kind of prey animal, another bird. And then here, narrow, again, pointed wing. This is an immature peregrine falcon. And you may notice on the lower right-hand corner that the wings are really quite long and they're quite pointed. Another thing to make them very maneuverable, because this is a bird that hunts things like ducks. I've seen it kill an ibis and things of that nature. So these are birds that will hunt over, let's say you have a flock of flying ducks or something, and this bird will fly above them and then pounce on them from behind, in the air, chasing them in the air. So they have to be very, very fast because these prey animals don't want to be caught. Okay, and then some amazing adaptation. This is that barred owl wing I showed you again. And many owls have these barbs that you see with the red arrow on the leading edge. So the leading edge of the wing is down. And those little barbs on there are very, very important, because here's this owl sitting up on a tree limb. It sees a prey animal. It's going to pounce on it, parachute down sort of on top of it. And its only advantage is it's quiet. And these little barbs at the front leading edge of the wings, they minimize the noise causing turbulence. So when they fly, they're almost silent when they fly. So a special adaptation. You don't see this in hawks because hawks are basically hunting during the daytime. There's not a lot of surprise, but an owl sitting at nighttime, they absolutely depend on surprising their prey animal. And that's a physical adaptation. Now, hearing. Okay, many species of owls and the northern harriers, they have very, very keen senses of hearing. And notice the feathers around the eye. It's just if you're outside, for example, and you have difficulty hearing somebody, you may put your hands up over your ears to and you actually hear better. That's exactly what these feathers around the eye, these bowls, if you wish, on the face, that actually help focus the sound to the ears. Okay, and ultraviolet vision, we don't have it. Humans, we don't see that. But a lot of species of birds do, not only hawks, but wood warblers, vireos, and things like that. And so they're seeing like way beyond our spectrum of light. But the urine of many small mammals, voles and mice and things like that, actually reflect the ultraviolet light. So as these birds are either hovering or flying low over a salt marsh, for example, can follow the trails of these mammals that just left a trail of urine behind. They can see it. Okay. So those are some of the characteristics and the definitions that we need, and I hope that's helpful. And there are 9 different species of what I refer to as year-round residents. These are the relatively more common, not all these are common, but these are among the more common birds that we would see in our area. And so we'll go through. So this is the bald eagle, our national symbol. This is one that we almost lost in the early 1960s. There were only 400 pairs of bald eagles in the entire 48 states. There are now very strong conservation efforts. There are well over 10,000 pairs now. But we almost lost this as a breeding species in North America. And its the scientific name comes from the Greek, a word that they use for osprey or some kind of sea eagle. And leucocephalus simply means white head. And it's monotypic. Now, what that means is there are no subspecies currently recognized. So if you see a bald eagle in Maine or a bald eagle in Florida, there may be a size difference, but they look the same. Okay, so it's endemic to North America. If you want to see one, you have to be in North America. They have large rivers, like the Merrimack River, along the coast of Maine, out of Quabbin Reservoir, places of that nature, so like that. Really handsome bird, and just notice the difference in the size of the body, 28 to 38 different inches. The wingspan is 66 to 96. Okay, one is at least half as bigger than some of the others. And the weight, notice the difference between 6.6 and 14 pounds. Well, one of the things about hawks and owls and eagles are females are bigger than the males. In the case of eagles, females tend to be 25% bigger than their male counterparts. The second thing that's going on here is that the birds of the northern latitudes are much bigger than the birds of the southern latitudes. So if you have a male bald eagle in Florida and you compare it to a female bald eagle in, say, Ontario, you're going to find them very, very significant differences in size. Okay. Okay, hunting techniques, they sit on a perch or they soar overhead. And once they detect where the prey, for example, they hunt ducks, they're very good duck hunters. So they'll sit up on a branch like this eagle was doing, and it was watching a group of ducks in the Merrimack River. And it would be watching where the ducks would dive down, how long it would take before they came up and where they'd come up, and it kept watching them over and over again. And once that eagle got the pattern in his mind, they're down, they go down here at this point, they come up at this point, and they're down for 30 seconds. And when it figures out the pattern, it will fly off its perch and sort of hover right over the water where the duck was. When the duck comes up, they'll grab it right off the surface of the water. These are really smart animals. So they eat fish, waterfowl, they'll eat reptiles, but during the wintertime, they are carrion eaters, they're scavengers. So I know that when they were first reintroducing bald eagles to Quabbin Reservoir, like 30, 40 years ago, they would put a deer carcass out on the ice in order to make sure that the eagles had something to eat. Okay, so the brood, 1 year, they're usually 1 to 3 eggs. In the incubation period of over a month, but then notice it could be as long as 3 months where the adults continue to bring food back for their young ones. And bald eagles, it takes them 5 years to become sexually active, mature, okay? So this is just the eagle's nest, a lot of sticks in there, okay? And just quickly going through them, again, it takes 5 years for the birds to get their adult plumage. And so you can get anything from the one on the left, which is in its when I took this photograph, was in it's not a year old yet, but it's referred to its second calendar year of life. So this bird probably was fledged sometime in late August. And I photographed this bird in, say, June. So it's not even really out of the nest even a year now. And then a second year bird. So birds are, they're given their ages based on like a racehorse. So if you're a bird that was hatched in June, you're a hatching year bird until December 31st. And on January 1st, you're now referred to as the second year bird. So just the different plumage characteristics. Notice the one on the right-hand side. It's almost there. It has a little bit of, it has a basically white head with a little brown still in it, and also in the tail. Okay. The next one is our really common red-tailed hawk. It was first observed in Jamaica, so that's where its specific name comes from. Notice the genus name, Buteo or Buteo, that means buzzard. And actually a bird in the same genus with this one, if you were in Europe, you would call it a buzzard. Okay, so a red-tailed hawk in our country is a honey buzzard in Europe. Okay, 6 different subspecies, but basically the ones east of the Mississippi all look like this one. Okay, so widespread throughout the US, open terrain, deserts, and it's really quite common in our winter along highways and things of that nature. Really, really beautiful. Notice the beautiful color of this bird's tail. Okay, and so again, there's a lot of variation in how big they are. Anything from 1.5 pounds to almost 3 pounds. That's a big difference. Again, because of the females being bigger than the males, and also because of the latitudes. Okay, so it could be, again, across the country, it can be significant differences. In the West, you have red-tailed hawks that are almost white or almost black. Okay, so hunting techniques, they either hunt from a perch or they soar overhead. Okay, and then they pounce on it. They capture their prey with their talons. This is one that has just captured a bull. I took this photograph on the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, and this red-tailed hawk had been soaring overhead and then pounced into the grass, and you might be able to see a bull in its mouth. So they have 1 brood a year, 1 to 5 eggs, incubation period a month, and then the adults have to take care of the young ones for at least a month and a half in the nest. And then often they will help the young ones for a short period of time after the young ones leave their nest. This is a bird that's not as common. Well, I'm really having difficulty seeing many of these. This is sharp-shinned hawk. It's accipiter is from the Latin meaning hawk, and striatus is, well, it has these stripes. Okay, there are 3 subspecies in North America, but we only see one of those subspecies in here. And this is a bird that used to be relatively common. The problem is that a bird in the same genus called the Cooper's hawk, those numbers are vastly increased. And I think the Cooper's hawks are out competing or eating the sharp-shinned hawks. Now, maybe in other parts of the state, they're more common than in the east here. They're widespread. They're a deep forest bird. Okay, and lots of them migrate through our area in the fall. If you were to go to Mount Tom or something like that and watch fall migration, you would see some. Again, notice they only weigh half a pound. They're not very big, especially the males. They're tiny. Okay. So hunting technique, this is a pursuit hunter. So it's chasing after things like cardinals and chickadees and titmouses and things of that nature. They catch most of their prey with their talons in flight. And when in breeding season, these birds will also take eggs and young ones out of other bird nests. Okay. So 90% of their diet is small birds. Okay. So they have 1 to 8 eggs. That's a lot to take care of. Incubation period a month, basically, and they're in the nest for another month. Okay. So this is in the same genus. Okay, accipiter. It's named for a zoologist and collector. This is a relatively big bird. Monotypic. Again, there are no subspecies. They all look similar to each other. They're widespread across North America. This is a forest bird, but I have them coming in my feeders too. I'm not purposely feeding Cooper's hawks, but they come anyway. Okay, and they're very common during fall migration. And the size, this is weighs up to a pound and a half. Okay, as I've been saying all along, just the females are significantly bigger than are the males. Okay. Now, I had a birding group out. This was on parking lot number 1 on the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, and it was a pursuit hunter. And we've been observing some things in the salt marsh. We start walking back to our cars, and I see this small bird fly by being chased by this bird right behind it. It was a starling being chased by this bird. The starling dove into the grass right at the base of this post that you see right here. And so there it is. The hawk is just sitting up there waiting for the starling to make a mistake. And the starling made a fatal mistake. It tried to fly away. And that's how far it got before that Cooper's hawk got it. This was from the size of this bird. This was a female. Okay, so they're eating medium to relatively large birds. Okay. 2 to 6 eggs, again, similar type of incubation period. Now, a lot of folks can confuse Cooper's hawk with sharp-shinned hawk. There are two field marks to really look for. Size can be difficult because a female sharp-shinned hawk is not much smaller than a male Cooper's hawk. Okay, so size can be different. But if you can see the tail, I'm sorry, in this case, see the head. Notice the head on the bird on the left. Notice it's really quite flat. Okay, where the sharp-shinned hawk, the bird on the right, the head is much more round. Okay, and another even better field mark, I think, is notice the tail. The Cooper's hawk has a distinctly rounded tail, where the bird on the right, the sharp-shinned hawk, has a distinctly squared. It's like when it was made, it was scissors, it was cut straight across. So if you are confused by these two birds, you look at the head, you look at the tail. Yeah. Then owls, this is a common, just because it's common doesn't mean we see them, but I think in the city of Newburyport, we have 5 or 6 known nests of screech owls, eastern screech owls. Okay, so we only have 1 subspecies in our area, and they come in. We'll see they'll come in 2 color morphs. This is the gray morph, and if you want to sort of hide in your roosting place or your nesting cavity, that's a pretty good plumage to have, you know, in that tree. They're widely distributed at farm fields, urban city parks. I got some of my best photographs right in a city park here in Newburyport. Okay, and this is a red morph, really handsome bird. Okay, and dark morphs and red morphs, gray morphs will interbreed with each other, no problem. The red morph is typically more common in the southern part. So it only weighs half a pound at most. So we're talking about really tiny little things, but it's hiding very efficiently in that little tree cavity. Now notice here, it has the little horns. It's just feathers. Those feathers are controlled by muscles. Okay, the feathers are in feather tracts, and by constricting those muscles, the feathers pop up. So you can go from this one where it has almost no horns to this one. Okay, so if you want to display for another owl, this would be you certainly are handsome with that, with their tufts up. Eating small birds, small mammals, insects, eats a lot of insects. Now this one sort of, here's a really gray morph in sort of a brown tree. But the incubation period about a month, and then in the nestling for another month. Okay. So screech owls, that's a bird that you can listen for in your backyard. Okay, because they are around urban areas too. This is the barred owl. Notice strix. It comes from the Latin. This is named for a type of screech owls somewhere within the Roman Empire that was thought to suck the blood of infants, but they don't. But that's okay. That's where that name comes from. And varia it's variegated in terms of its plumage. There are 3 subspecies in North America, but we only see 1 of those. Okay, this is an area of bird that really loves conifer forest and mixed forest of woodland. So if you have a swampy area or a river through some relative open space, this is a bird that you should be looking for. And it has a very distinctive call. It sounds like, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" Okay, so common. Unfortunately, several years ago, we found lots of them along the highway. There must have been a big movement of these owls into our area. There were lots of them killed along the highway. But one thing to notice about this, notice how huge that head is compared to the rest of the body. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay? So here it can be either 1 to 2.5 pounds or 2.3 pounds. Notice again that structure of the feathers around on the side of the face to focus the sound into the ears. Okay. Here's one just breeding. This is another one of the pounce hunters. They like to sit up on a branch or something and then just drop down onto whatever's prey is. But this is interesting. They basically eating mice and voles and rabbits and things of that nature. But they will also come down land next to a pond, and they'll actually try to catch reptiles, amphibians, and fishes. So they'll be happy to eat a frog as well as anything else. But that's really the only owl I know that does that. So incubation period, they only have 1 brood a year, nesting in the nest for another month after hatching. Okay. Now, this is a bird that is relatively common in New England, but not many people see it. Okay, this is one that every once in a while I'll see him roosting in some dense pines or things like that. But usually they're impossible to photograph because they're so tied up in the vegetation. There is one subspecies that we have here. I went down to the Uxbridge area, and there was a banding operation going there. And I was able to photograph some of these saw-whet owls. And they get the name saw-whet because the call sounds like somebody sharpening a saw. Okay. You can go online and ask for the sound of a saw-whet owl. Okay. And so this is throughout the area, they breed in our area, but they are usually so far tucked away in wooded swamps and back in the forest that they're almost impossible to find. But there are a number of bird banding stations that catch these birds and band them. This is a banding operation at nighttime. This was at Uxbridge in October of this year. And you can see, based on the size of this woman's hand, this is not a very big bird, okay? And they are looking at the feathers of the wing, trying to determining how old this bird is. They molt their feathers in a sequence that they will retain some feathers for more than 1 year. So depending on looking at that feather, you can discern its approximate age. And that's what they're doing there. Okay. Now notice again the wing, how shorted, how stubby this thing, and how rounded it is. Because again, this is another bird that's just going to pounce on something. It's not going to pursue prey through a forest. It's a relatively slow flyer. And I just think that is just such a really beautiful bird. It feeds on mice and things of the nature. These small owls will feed on insects. They'll feed on moss and crickets and cicadas and things of that nature. Now, the key thing is notice how huge that head is relative to well, you don't see much of the body, but it's just an enormous head. And the key thing there is for these birds that are hunting at nighttime, they need to put their eyes far apart and especially their ears far apart because they're going to be listening for their prey. And by getting their ears far apart on a big head, it's easier for them to triangulate and determine how far away is that possible prey animal. But I think that can be a sort of cute bird right there. Okay, great horned owl. This is a relatively common bird around here. Bubo is its genus name for Latin for eagle or an owl. Okay, and Virginiensis that's where it was first described. So the 9 subspecies in North America, we only have 1 here. So our birds here are the ones in, say, Arizona, New Mexico, do have differences, especially in size. Okay, they like to be in woodlands, but they can be in urban environments too, and out in deserts, and they're common. And this is a bird that, as we get into January, February, March, you should be listening for them. Go out on a still night in a woodland, and you may well hear one. Okay, so they can huge difference in size. Notice in the weight from 2 pounds to 5.5. So there's a lot of variation in this. Of course, the male. I took this photograph in New Mexico. This was in the ruins of an old monastery, a Pueblo monastery. Okay, this is they sit up in a tree typically and pounce on their prey. One way, if you're ever walking through a woodland and you smell a skunk, you might want to start looking, see whether you could possibly find a great horned owl's nest, because they eat skunks, and very often, or well, you can often detect a great horned owl by the smell of the skunk it has harvested. Okay? Now, great horned owls don't build their own nests. They may add a stick or something, but they typically take over other nests from last year, like an osprey nest or a great blue heron nest or a red-tailed hawk nest from a prior year. And very soon after the young ones are hatched, they sort of move around the tree. They leave the nest, and using their talons and their beak, they move themselves around the tree. So this bird, this fledgling, which I photographed, was a whole tree over from where its nest had been. So very often you'll go to a great horned owl nest and you'll see the young ones, and then all of a sudden they're gone. Well, you just keep looking somewhere. They must be around somewhere near. Okay. Now, is there any question in your mind as peregrine falcon is looking at me? He knows precisely where I am. Okay. This is, there are 3 subspecies in North America. There's 16 of them worldwide, so there's quite a bit of variety. These birds are throughout Eurasia and in Africa, things like that. Now, due to pesticides, DDT, hunting, we lost the native subspecies in New England. It was extirpated, no more, okay? But so they reintroduced peregrine falcons from Eurasia in Africa back into New England again, okay? So the subspecies that the peregrine falcons that we're seeing now are a mixed subspecies based on birds that were reintroduced into this country from Europe and Asia. Anyway, so this would have been a real shame to have lost this bird permanently, okay? So they're found on all the continents except Antarctica. They're not there. And they're barrier islands, open landscapes. They come down, we see them during the migration. And these things nest in oil. They nest, if you're familiar with Newburyport, there's a bridge that goes from Newburyport over to Salisbury. That's a Route 1 bridge. And for the last several years, they've nested underneath that bridge. Okay. So, and 1.5 to 3.5 pounds. This is a second/third year bird. You can see in the wings, there's still some brown plumage in the wing feathers. Now here's I don't think this peregrine falcon would want any other peregrine falcon to see it. Here it is sitting up on a fish. Well, when things are really dire, okay, when conditions are very, very harsh, a lot of these birds will stop their pursuit hunting and they'll try to eat carrion. So the fact that a peregrine falcon is actually eating a fish just shows how desperate the times are. And these hawks, eagles, peregrine falcons will do this when times are tough. Okay. Notice how pointed the wings are on this thing. This is a bird that I photographed on the south end of Plum Island. This is as I remember, I photographed this bird in October. And this, I'm quite sure, was one of the birds that had fledged from underneath the Route 1 bridge. So this bird is about 3 months old when I photographed this bird. Really, notice underneath the eye, that very, very dark stripe. Really, really handsome bird. Okay. Now, there are 3 species I refer to as winter raptors. These are ones that in times past, northern harriers did nest in this area. They do nest in Maine and up in northern New Hampshire, places like that. But they used to nest here. But now we typically, at least in my area, in eastern Massachusetts, only see this bird during the wintertime, late fall, winter. Then the rough-legged hawk and merlin. Okay, this is most of these photographs I took on the Salisbury Beach State Reservation, Salisbury, Massachusetts. And it's the genus name, I think, is wonderful. It's Circus, okay? And it's partially mythical hawk, okay, coming out of the Greek. And it was named because it seems to circle around when it's hunting. And there are 2 subspecies, one in North America and one in Eurasia. So this is a juvenile female, a young female. They're widespread over North America, especially as you go further north and out in the plain states. It's like large tracts of wetlands and grasslands and tundra. Now, for a lot of these birds, eastern Massachusetts, the open farm fields of central part of Massachusetts sort of looks like tundra, so they're welcome hunting over that area. They're really quite common along the coast, Park River National Wildlife Refuge in Salisbury, for example, down in Cape Cod. So this is a bird that birders refer to the male as the gray ghost. Okay, here in where I am in eastern Massachusetts, this is a really tough bird to see. I only see a few of these during the wintertime, because apparently they have a very different migration route in the fall than do the females and the young ones. So this is the male. Okay, this is a photograph I actually took on the breeding ground. I took this photograph in Nome, Alaska. I'm fortunate to have it fly by. I noticed the beautiful white, silvery gray, black of this bird, and they hunt into the wind, because what they're doing, they hold their wings out, and as the wind is coming out, the wind going over the wing surfaces, a Bernoulli's principle, that wind going over the top, it speeds up relative to the wind underneath the wing, and that speeding up air, the barometric pressure drops, and that gives a suction that helps the bird stay in the air. Okay, so they always hunt that way. This is another juvenile female. Notice how red she is underneath. And again, as I point out, they fly into the wind very, very slowly. So by flying into the wind, you can get lift to be up in the air, and you can also go very, very slowly, looking for the small mammals and birds and reptiles. Coming right at you. So they have one brood a year, 4 to 5. And the fascinating thing to me, one male can have as many as 5 different mates that he's trying to, usually 1 or 2, but that he's trying to hunt for and provide food not only for the female, but for their young ones. So he's a busy person all year. Here's one on the ground ripping apart a small bird. You can see the feathers. Yeah. Oh, and right here, notice on this bird, I've noticed distended crop. A crop is part of the esophagus, okay? And what this bird is doing, it is taking some food all the way down to its stomach. But in order to store food for later on, it's storing that meat that's ripped off that bird that it's been eating in this portion of the esophagus called the crop, and sort of like carrying your lunch pail along with you. So that's what that is. Okay. Okay, so this is our next one. This is rough-legged hawk. Notice the specific name, lagopus, hair like the animal, hair for it, because it has feathers on its feet. Okay. There's 2 subspecies worldwide. We only see 1 of them. And they come in 2 color morphs, a light morph and a dark one. This is a bird where the red-tailed hawk basically breeds north all the way up into Canada until a tree line. And then north of tree line, then you get the rough-legged hawk. And so we get a few of these during our winter time. Okay. So 1.6 pounds to 3. And this is a bird that hovers like an osprey or like a tern or a kingfisher. It faces into the wind and hovers, because remember, in its breeding grounds north of the tree line, there are no trees. So it can't sit up in a tree and look for prey. It sort of has to let the updrafts or thermals, there are not many thermals because it doesn't ever get that hot, but there's a lot of wind that hits an object and goes up. Well, that updraft that you see, they use that to hover. They face into that and they sort of hover. So a field mark, if you're in the field, now red-tailed hawks will do this occasionally, but if in the wintertime you see a hawk that's hovering like an osprey or something, you want to look for it to see whether that could be a rough-legged hawk. Okay. Here's the dark morph. Okay. They interbreed with each other. I've seen pairs of them in, say, in Churchill, Manitoba, and they're a dark morph and light morph are mated pair. Okay. This is a real key field mark for those if you're looking for rough-legged hawk. Notice the compare. I want show you, these are two buteos. They're in the same genus. The one is a red-tailed hawk and the other is rough-legged hawk. But notice the difference in the size of their bills. So if you see one of these perched and you're really questioning, well, could that be a red-tailed hawk, or is there any chance it's a rough-legged hawk? Notice the shape of that bill. Okay, the size and shape of the bill. It's the red-tailed hawk, it's huge. And that rough-legged hawk has just a little tiny little bill. So that's a good aid to field identification. Okay, the merlin. We typically have these come through in spring and fall migrations, and we have some that overwinter in our area. Okay, the old name for this was pigeon hawk. Okay, some of the long-term bird. When I got my first bird book, I had duck hawk, pigeon hawk, and sparrow hawk. So duck hawk for the peregrine, pigeon hawk for the merlin, and sparrow hawk for the American kestrel. Okay, so they're typically out in semi-open areas. They come through our area, especially in the winter. This is a bird that I photographed in the fall on Plum Island. The biggest ones only weigh half a pound, so we're not talking about a huge bird at all, but really handsome bird. This is the bird here. Now, the other thing to notice, here is a merlin, and it's caught a shorebird. I'm not exactly sure what that is. It could well be a semi-palmated sandpiper from the size of, but notice how large that prey animal is compared to the merlin. So this is a bird that is a pursuit hunter, the merlin is, so it's capturing its prey in the air. So if you have some shorebirds feeding, say, on a mud flat or sand, and the merlin will often fly at them, okay, hoping that one is going to take off, and either a young one or something like that is not very experienced. If it takes off, it's easy prey for the merlin. So this is an adult female, or could be a juvenile. They look very similar in terms of their plumages. And so the incubation period is a month, and nesting period is another month. And I'll conclude the presentation this afternoon with these two eruptive species. Again, these are the species of birds that I can't tell you from one year to the next whether we're going to see them. Now, we probably will, but sometimes, again, we might have lots of snowy owls, and in another year, you have to scrounge one to see if you can find one or two. So that's referred to as eruptive species. And this is the short-eared owl. I happen to photograph this in Nome, Alaska. That's on its breeding grounds, for example. And they're not quite sure of how many different subspecies there are that's still being studied. But this is the tundra, subarctic tundra in Nome, Alaska. And they like to hunt over, they're widespread. Even out in the Galapagos Islands, they have short-eared owls. So open country, grasslands, and things of that nature. Eruptive species, sometimes we get almost none, sometimes we get quite a few of them. Okay, and this is, if you're out either in the early morning in an open area like Parker River National Wildlife or grasslands out in the middle part of the state, things like that, and you see something that looks like a huge moth that's flying, you want to start thinking, do I have an owl there? Okay. Because notice again the shape of the size of this thing. Okay, this huge head relative to the rest of the body. That's to keep the eyes and ears far apart, because it will tend to fly back and forth over an area, listening and looking for prey as it goes. This is a crepuscular hunter. Crepuscular means twilight. So this is the best chances of seeing this is in either early morning or late afternoon. For example, if you were to come to the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge here in the late afternoon, you might want to go partway down the refuge road and overlook the salt marshes and the moat areas for what you look like a big flopping moth as they fly through the air. And so this is the key thing here. So during the daytime, you have the harriers, they're feeding in the similar way, flying very low over the marsh, typically into the wind, looking and listening for prey. Well, and then by the end of the day, it's, shift change. Now it's the time for the short-eared owls. Again, small numbers of them, but they're hunting. And then we get dark, and that's the time for your barred owls and your great horned owls and things of that nature. So you can see its tiny little tufts on top of its head. So lemmings and rabbits things of that nature. On the Galapagos Islands, they eat petrels. Okay. And here again, you can get a real sense for the shape of this, the relatively short, very rounded, stubby wings, the huge head of the bird as it's hunting. And the story behind this snowy owl, we really encourage anybody, photographers, everything, to give these birds a break. Don't get too close. I happened to be at Salisbury Beach State Reservation, and I was just observing, looking out in the ocean, and I turned around, and right there was a snowy owl. I had flown in and landed on top of this kiosk that was maybe 50 feet away from me. Okay, I didn't approach it, it approached me, and it landed on top of this little kiosk that is out at one of the parking lots. So it's open. This is a bird of the tundra. I was in Gette or Barrow this last June, and I saw them on their breeding grounds on the Arctic tundra up there. So again, eruptive, sometimes we get a lot, sometimes we don't. But when you get really good opportunities to look at these birds, they are absolutely stunning. You know, you look at this bird, it has a tiny little beak, right? But then when it opens its mouth, that's why it can, you know, it can swallow a lemming or a mouse or something like that whole. These can be either diurnal or nocturnal hunters. And one of the amazing things is a lot of these snowy owls overwinter on the pack ice in northern Atlantic Ocean, and they're feeding on ducks out there. So here's an owl way out in the middle of the ocean on those ice floes feeding on ducks. Pretty amazing. So primary food is small mammals, lemmings, and things like that. They'll go after ptarmigan, waterfowl, as I said, out in the North Atlantic, and things of that nature. And you'll get a lot of different colors. And sometimes folks would say, oh, these dark ones, those are the young ones, and those are the females. It's not quite that certain, because a lot of studies indicate that the only certain way that you can tell if it's a snowy owl is to weigh it and measure it, with the females being significantly larger. Okay, so we're coming to the end. That's, again, the old snowy owl, and we end the presentation with a peregrine falcon. You might notice on its right leg, it has a band, and it's, well, it's definitely the end for something that it's enjoying. This happens to be on the gate that's on the bridge that goes over to the Plum Island. That's the Plum Island Bridge. Okay, I am done for now, and Mina, if you have any questions that folks have, I'd be happy to attempt them.
Great. I have lots of questions here. But before I get started with questions, first of all, there have been some great comments about people seeing birds and raptors in their neighborhoods or when they've been traveling. Also, I think I'm going to try to get Bill back again, and I'm wondering if I could crowdsource if you'd be interested in ducks of New England, shorebirds of New England, or introduction to bird watching. So if you can put your answer in the chat, I will go with the majority rules. So the first question from Deborah, Bill, is why are female eagles larger than male eagles?
Okay, I think one of an explanation that I've heard is that you could, first of all, the female eagle is going to have to lay the eggs, okay? So the bigger she is, the bigger the egg, therefore the egg can contain more nutrients and things of that nature. And well, and then you could say, well, why aren't they just the same size? Well, the idea is this: if you have the birds of the male and female being the same shape and size and everything, then they probably could only hunt for the same thing, okay? Because how big you are, how wide your wings are, all these things can have impact on how fast you can be, how fast you can turn, those type of things. So if you have a female that's going to have the burden of laying all the eggs and doing all that kind of stuff, if she's larger, that's helpful. And the male, okay, if he has a different configuration, different shape, he can. So if you have a spectrum of food, okay, she may be able to hunt in this spectrum, okay, but because he's a little bit smaller, a little bit more maneuverable, maybe he can increase the range of food that they can both go after, which is a huge selective advantage. if you're trying to make sure that you have enough food to feed the female and the young ones. Okay, so it has to do with the body shape and size. An advantage for the female if she's going to be doing all the laying all the eggs, an advantage for the couple and their offspring if the male and female are slightly different, so the male can hunt for a different range of animals than the female can.
Okay, thank you. Diane says, can an osprey be pulled underwater and drowned by their prey?
Can an osprey?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. The reason that ospreys are not included in the winter raptors, all of our ospreys are somewhere along the Texas Gulf Coast, South America, or Middle America or South America. So that's why it's not included here. But typically, if an osprey it will go after a prey, and if the prey is too big, it will just drop it. Okay. I mean, I've seen ospreys catch fish that are really large and try to fly away with it, and just can't fly. It's just way too heavy, and will drop the prey back in. So I would think it's a rare occurrence that the osprey would actually be pulled underwater. The fish may well able to get away because it's just simply too heavy. The one other thing to notice is when you have an osprey and it catches a fish, when it goes into the water, it's never quite sure whether the head is going to be forward or back. Okay. Well, in order for the osprey to fly, it must turn that fish around so the head is facing forward. Because if the osprey tries to fly with the fish with its tail forward, it flops to one side, making the bird not aerodynamic at all. Okay, makes it much harder to fly. So you'll see an osprey go catch a fish, and if it's so the head is towards the back, the osprey will work to turn that fish around so the head is forward. So as the bird flies, the osprey flies with the fish, the tail is held straight back rather than flopping to one side up front.
Judith asks, do accipiters chase live birds to eat during winter as well?
Oh, the accipiters, yeah. I mean, they will come to your bird feeder chasing your, depending on whether it's a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk. The Cooper's hawk is going to be interested in things like blue jays or evening grosbeaks or mourning doves, things if you have any robins around. And your sharp-shinned hawk are going to be going after the smaller birds, the titmouses and chickadees and nuthatches and things like that. And they are pursuit hunters year-round. They absolutely depend on catching prey in the air, or coming in, diving into your feeding area and grabbing a bird that's just off the ground.
Thank you. Terry says, does the sharp-skinned hawk really have sharp shins?
Slightly so. Yeah, the legs are not completely round. Okay, so it's not a field mark that is of any use to anybody. Okay, but yeah, it's the legs are a little bit edgy at the back or something. You know.
And Sally asks, are the tufts on the screech owl's head their ears?
No, those are just feathers. Okay, so the ears actually on owls, the ears are on either side. So the eyes are front, and the ears are on either side. Now, one of the adaptations on owls is we have our ears that are opposite each other. Okay, owls typically have their ears off-centered. Okay, and that is another way for them to help them triangulate on when they hear a sound, as to be able to triangulate where that sound is coming from. Now, what you see, those tufts on the great horned owl, long-eared owl, eastern screech owl, those are just feathers. And a topic maybe sometime in the future, feathers, introduction to ornithology. The idea is that feathers on the vast majority of birds, while you see them covering the entire body, are not attached all over the body. The feathers are in tracts, T-R-A-C-T-S, in tracts. Okay? And then there's bare space between them. But yet still the feathers from the outside appearance covers the entire body. And those tracts have muscles. Okay. So when the bird wants to put those tufts up, like in a courtship display or something like that, they just tense up the muscles and up go the feathers.
Judith asks, where are the ears on the faces of the owls with the bowl-shaped feathers surrounding the eyes?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Where are the ears on the faces of the owls with the
Okay.
bowl-shaped feathers surrounding their eyes?
Okay, so you have the eyes, and then you have the bowls here. The ears are just slightly behind that.
Ah, okay.
Underneath the feathers.
Okay, so Vincent asks, he says, what is their expected lifespan? And I expect he probably was at a certain bird, but maybe if he's still here, you can put it in the chat which bird you were talking about.
Yeah, but generally speaking, the smaller the owl, the shorter their lifespan. Okay, so yeah, something like a screech owl. I mean, first of all, if you can get by the first year, okay, the first year for all of these animals, for vast majority of birds, more than half of the first year, the hatching year birds never make it, and they don't, either they starve because they can't find food, or some other predator gets them. But then 4 or 5 years probably for an eastern screech owl would be a pretty good lifetime. Where great horned owls, especially in captivity, they can live 25, 30 years. Okay, but in the wild, if they're in a cage and being fed every day, that's very different than being an owl that's outside 24 hours a day having to feed itself. And as we get older, we get a little bit slower. At least I do.
I don't think you're alone there.
Okay.
So you were correct. It was a generic question. Vincent says any of these birds. Claudius asks, are red shoulder and broad-winged hawks year-round residents?
Very good question. Thank you. No, broad-winged hawks, they're not. There are 0 of them in North America. It's a very, very common hawk in spring migration, summer, and they nest in large numbers in the northern forest. But by, say, November, all of them are out of North America and are in South America. It means that every one of them leaves. Now, red-shouldered hawk may become, in the eastern part of Massachusetts, at least where I am, I have seen 1 or 2, only very occasionally do I see a red-shouldered hawk. I did see one here in our area the other day. But for us in the east here, it's not a very common hawk at all. But it is a year-round resident, yes. So some of the folks who are watching the presentation in the middle part of the state or western part of the state or whatever may well have them. They may see them much more commonly than I do. I see very, very few of them, but they're here.
Okay. Terry says most of them have very large eyes. Do you know how far they can see?
No, I don't. I imagine that most of the owls are not seeing all that far. But when you think, just think of the red-tailed hawk or the rough-legged hawk or red-tailed hawk. When they're soaring, they're very often a couple hundred feet off the ground, or at least 100 feet off the ground. And yet they can see a snake or a vole or a mole that's in among the grass. So their eyesight is extraordinarily strong. But how far they can see, I don't know. But they have a very acute sight.
That's what I've always heard too. Sally says, do we have many red-shouldered hawks in this area? I know of them along the shoreline of Connecticut, but can't remember hearing of them around here. But there was somebody just in the chat, Jean, who said that there's a red-shouldered hawk nest in their woods in Pepperell.
Okay, well yes, it's not surprising that as you get a little bit further away from the coast, that again, red-shouldered hawks are here all year. I just don't see them, okay, where we are. But if you get into more forested areas and you get further into western part of Massachusetts, especially along the New Hampshire border, I would anticipate that you would see them.
Someone asks, when raptors are taking care of young birds, do they pursue the same prey as when they are not parenting?
Very good question. Yeah, it depends on the species of birds. For example, typically, when you're trying to feed young ones, they'll take whatever they can get. Okay, I mean, but you would think of a red-tailed hawk typically going after medium-sized mammals and snakes and things like that. But there are things like the sharp-shinned hawk and Cooper's hawk that while they are pursuit hunters, that's how they make their livings. When they have young ones, they will also seek out the nests of songbirds and steal the eggs or steal the young ones. So yeah, they're looking for whatever prey they can get in order to. Can you just imagine if you're a male, one of these male hawks, and having to feed yourself and the female and 2 or 3 or 4 young ones? It's a huge amount of work.
Mhm.
And so they will take a broad, the amount of prey broadens out, during the nesting season.
Mhm. It's not like they have a babies R Us for birds, right?
Yeah.
Um, Nancy asks, has any long-eared owls returned? There were two that I saw a few years back, I believe, in the Salisbury Reservation.
Yes, there are long-eared owls around. There have been some in a woodland in Lexington for many years in a row. One of the things about long-eared owls is disturbance is a real problem for them. So when I was working for Mass Audubon, we would have a winter birding contest. And what we would do, and also a birdathon, a fundraising event where people go out and see how many species of birds we do. We would always give the teams a free long-eared owl because we did not want birders going in and disturbing where it's a relatively low number of birds, and we didn't want them to be as disturbed. So in order to encourage people not to go looking for them, we would give them a free one. Okay, so if they were trying to get to 150 species, well, there's number one, that's free. You got that for nothing. Okay. And that, again, because of our concerns for the conservation of long-eared owls, and I'm a photographer, and I really encourage people to be responsible photographers. And if you're getting too near a bird of prey, you're disturbing it because it has to pay attention to you, thinking you may be a potential predator. You're interfering with its ability to hunt. And things like that. And a lot of birds, even with shorebirds, when we'd leave field trip, we would always, if we saw a group of shorebirds and we were getting everybody to look at them, that's fine. But if we made them fly, we made a mistake. We got too close. Okay, so I really encourage people, if you're doing photography, to be, you don't want to get such a great photograph that you harm the bird, or fox or coyote or whatever.
That is important. Thank you so much for that. Ellen asks, what do we do about rat bait stations? They are everywhere in Newton.
Yeah, well, I just sent a email to the Senate, Massachusetts Senate, asking them to please consider that rat poison bill that's before the Senate, because this is I don't know, because the animals that are going to suffer from this are the hawks and the owls, because these rats and things absorb the poisons. And just like we lost the bald eagles and the ospreys, or almost did, because of the buildup DDT and the fishes and things like that, the animals that suffer also are the predators that then eat those animals that are affected, that have ingested these poisons. So it's a really bad thing. Another thing is these poison. Remember, your cat out. Some people, I mean, we encourage people not to let their cats outside. But cats outside are going to eat mice that may have eaten that poison, so it's dangerous for them too. So I don't, quite honestly, I don't know what the solution is, unless, I don't know. It's a real problem, because you don't want all kinds of rats all over the place. But on the other hand, you don't want to be killing off the predators that eat the rats, because the rats are going to survive, the predators are not, and then you're going to have more rats.
Right. So try to take it up a level, talk to your representatives. Barbara says, do these birds both share nest building responsibilities, mate for life?
Well, okay. It depends again on the species of bird. Bald eagles nest, they mate for life. Now, when I say mate for life, they will maintain the same partner as long as that partner is around. Okay, I mean, is alive. Okay, so what I always, because the bald eagles, the pair of bald eagles or ospreys or whatever, don't stay together during the wintertime. They come to the same. So I always think of them as these birds are mated to the nest site. Okay. And they come back to the same nest site, and all that they say, I remember you're Mildred from last year, and so that's the idea there. So so in terms of some of these birds of prey, ospreys and bald eagles, they nest, quote, for life. They keep the same, they're monogamous, they only have one mate. And I'm sorry, I don't remember what the other part of that question was.
If they mate for life.
Yeah, well, then, yes, and some of the other species do not.
Okay.
So it depends on, so if you think of eagles and ospreys, they do.
Mhm. Sarah asked a while ago, is it true that ospreys' talons lock in place when they have a fish?
I've heard that. I don't know how physically that's done, but the grasp is very, very tight. I'm not exactly sure what the mechanism is for that.
Mhm. Okay. Martha says, how close will these different birds nest?
Okay, bald eagles tend to want to be a significant distance apart. I mean, miles apart, better. Not always. The case of, say, a bald eagle, the optimum breeding place would be somewhere along a river or large lake. Okay, and so that restricts how many nesting places there actually are, because you don't want to be 20 miles from a river or lake and have to commute back and forth trying to find a fish. Okay, so they set up territories and will defend those territories, but on average, how far they have to be apart. I know in Amesbury, we have a couple, but they're about a mile apart. I think that's about as close as they come. Again, because the key thing for a lot of these birds is maintaining enough food. So they want to set up and defend the territory to make sure there's enough food. Now, in the sound, the salt marshes and sound behind Plum Island, ospreys will really tolerate each other quite well because there's a lot of food out there. And so within that area, I think last time I took a trip out into the sound behind to the west of Plum Island, I mean, we probably saw 15 to 18 osprey nests in an area that's probably 25, less than 25 square miles, maybe 15 square miles. So the nest density there is really quite high. But things like peregrine falcons and things like that, they don't tolerate another peregrine falcon in the close proximity at all.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, they'll kill each other.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Barbara asks, how common are goshawks? I'm thinking I'm saying that wrong.
Okay, try it one more time.
How common are goshawks?
Oh, goshawks.
Goshawks.
Yeah, goshawk. Okay, if you see a goshawk, I'd like to know about it. I mean, this is one of those things that if you go farther and farther up into the North Woods, they become more common. Okay, this is an accipiter. It's related to the Cooper's hawks, and so this is a bird. For example, if you to go to the Connecticut Lakes region, I'm quite familiar with that area. In northern New Hampshire, I've seen them up there. But this is typically a deep forest hawk, and it hunts for. It's a pursuit hunting hawk, as is the Cooper's hawk. But this is not a very common bird at all. I see very, very few of them.
Mhm.
So if she hasn't seen one, she's not alone. Okay, it's.
Interesting. So I just have time for another question or two, and I see them a couple in the chat. What about identifying birds of prey while driving, such as on a parkway when they're sitting at the top of a lamppost? It's hard to know what I'm seeing as I'm driving by so quickly. Any hints?
Okay, yes, I have a couple hints. Okay, if you're driving along and you're seeing a hawk that's perched up along the side of a highway, I'm going to guess that more than 90% of the time that it's a red-tailed hawk. Okay, especially in the winter. Okay, the other thing is when in the east now, our red-tailed hawks look very similar to each other, as opposed to the subspecies that are out west that look very different than ours. Okay. They would interbreed with each other, but they just don't look like our red-tailed. The one thing to notice, and you have to keep your eyes on traffic, but as you drive along, the key field mark of a red-tailed hawk is it has what's referred to as a belly band. There's a stripe of brown along the breast of it. If I can just scoot back here, where's red-tailed hawk? Okay, look. If I could just show that slide. From the current slide, notice that band. If you could, can you still see it, Mina?
Yeah.
If you see that band of brown that goes, so that's called a belly band. Every red-tailed hawk has it. Well, every red-tailed hawk in the east has it. So that is a field mark. If it's a fairly large hawk that has that belly band, then that's going to be a red-tailed hawk. The other one that you might see is Cooper's hawk. Again, I don't see many sharp-shinned hawks. So, I mean, I'll have occurrences of seeing in my area, 50 Cooper's hawks for every sharp-shinned hawk, or even worse than that. Okay, so that's not one I would expect along the highway. So if you see a bird that has a fully striped breast, whether it has any reddish color to it or not, that would probably be highly probable that that's a Cooper's hawk. But if you see one with a whitish breast like this one with that belly band, is almost 100% sure that's red-tailed.
And one last question, which I think is really interesting. Jeannie says, a few decades ago, there was a great gray owl in Rowley that photographers were baiting with frozen bait. So this is considered an unethical practice. Is that right?
Oh, I believe so. Yes. Yes, I remember that hawk. I remember seeing it. Okay. And matter of fact, I'm waiting for a report of either a hawk owl or a great gray owl somewhere in New England this winter, so I could go follow it. But no, they were getting way, way too close to the great gray owl. And my opinion is, but they wanted to stick around so they could feed it. But I don't think that's right. That's my opinion, because you don't know what's in that frozen mouse either.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and I think at the end of the day, what I would encourage people is to make it so that we're ensuring or working towards the survival of these animals at the expense of a good photograph.
Absolutely. Especially with so many of them having been on the verge of extinction too. We have to be careful. So that's all the questions that we have. And Bill, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Obviously, people have really enjoyed it and have learned a lot. And I will send out the video link and any notes of information in a recap within the day or so. But I will definitely be in touch, Bill, to have you back, because obviously we just think you're amazing. Your photographs are phenomenal. I've just not seen the like.
I really appreciate it. Again, these photographs has been over years to get these many, and again, give the hawks a break and owls.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again.
Okay.
Thank you everybody for being here, and I will be in touch within a day or so. Have a wonderful day. Bill, I'll
It's
email
been a
you.
real pleasure to working with you. Yep.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We'll be in touch very soon. Have a
Okay.
good day, everyone. I'm gonna